Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We are going to do an album review today, which is where I listen to an entire album. We go track by track, checking out what each song is doing individually and how it's contributing to the larger work as a whole. Today we're going to be looking at Inferi. I did a little bit of research on them. They're a tech mellow death band, kind of mixing a bunch of the stuff I enjoy about death metal. I'm kind of hoping it's gonna work for me, but we'll see. I did accidentally, I say accidentally as if you just accidentally read things, they just fly in front of you. But I did see a review on this album. It was a top review on Rate Your Music, and the opening line kind of caught me a little bit, and then I was like, oh, what's going on here? And then I ended up reading like the opening paragraph. Interestingly for this person, Inferi is a band that tends to bounce off of them on first listen as they find them to be a bit safe, but later on down the line, a few months later possibly, a song pops into their head, bit of an earworm, and they give the album a second go, and they tend to enjoy it a bit more knowing what they're expecting. So, melodic tech death is pretty big sell for me, but I'm going to come in with my expectations a little lower so that if they're met, well, it's a fine reaction, and if they aren't met and they're exceeded, well, that just means that I'm going to have an even better reaction to them. Much better than overselling them, I think. So, we're going to kick off with the first track, No Gods But Our Flesh, which is the title track. It's also our opening track. There's only 8 tracks on this album. All of them revolve around 5 minutes each, so I don't know how often I'll be grouping songs. We may stop at the end of each of them to talk about them. With all of that said, it's already 2 minutes into this video. Let's get rolling with No Gods But Our Flesh. Lovely bass work right off the bat. Those bass kicks were disgusting. What were those 30-second notes? Well played. I really enjoyed that the mode that the guitarist decided to be in for the solo wasn't that far differentiated from their typical harmonic work here than their core riffs. Nice 4 here, but also nice, real quick 6-8. The two of them working together really well. Yeah, give me that bass. A nice adaptation of the bass line to the guitar with a little bit of variation for the instrument. Yep, the fade out for a smaller ending here. I don't want to. We'll keep it going. Love that. The melodic drumming is so good. Melodic drumming with polyrhythms? Yes. Very moody and atmospheric. Using the vocals too quickly. I'm going to use one beat, but bring in this new speed and rhythm. I love the rhythmic switch-ups in the vocal stuff. Very tasteful hammer on there. I implore you all, go back to the guitar solo and listen to what the bassist is doing underneath it. Really great counterpoint. Got the choir on the outside. Yeah, very cool. Accenting 1 and 4 out of an 8-bar phrase. Just really leaving that back 4 beats empty, devoid of rhythmic flow. Yeah, really nice semiola going on here. A bit on the slower side, but I think it works really well with that slow cymbal work. Ooh. Alright, we gotta pause now, even... Okay, well it does fade out to nothing. We get a hard stop between this and the next. I wasn't expecting the tracks to flow together, but I'm not one to interrupt consistent movement of ideas, so... Yeah, though, this is nice. Alright, so I don't know if there's too much that I want to speak about, specifically differentiating these two tracks. Anything that would be a unique topic for No Gods But Our Flesh, or a unique topic for Maelstrom Prison. Both tracks, at least to me, feel like they're doing the same thing. Yeah, I mean, there might be some structure stuff I could talk about, but I think the core elements, the topics that I think are worth bringing up and exploring what they do well is consistent across both of these tracks. And I'm kind of guess going forward, this is what we listen to. I don't think they're going to be engaging any tomfoolery or keeping me on my toes. As per that review I had read and what I've listened to here, they seem like a band that does their one thing very well and they stick to what they know. I'm not expecting a ballad to come up on the album anywhere, is what I'm saying. With that said, this is my kind of metal. All right, let's ignore the vocals for a bit, because part of me does wish they were kind of clean sometimes. But we'll ignore that for a little bit. We're going to focus on the bass, the guitars. I don't know if there's two guitarists, but there's certainly multiple guitar lines consistently, and the drums. I love this type of metal. It feels energetic, it feels contrasty, it feels like it's constantly moving forward and engaging with me. It feels like metal made for me, which is like a really weird statement. They obviously have no idea who I am. They don't know what my tastes are. They didn't make it for me, but it feels like it was custom made for me. It explores interesting harmonic devices. It has riffs that are not pedal tone heavy. The riffs are also fairly linear. They do repeats. They are still riffs, but they're riffs on the larger idea. A lot of the metal that I get thrown my way that I tend to describe as traditional metal or heavy metal in their riff style usually works within 4-bar phrases with a 1-bar phrase that might get pitch shifted. You play the riff, then you raise it up a third, you raise it up to the fifth, and you bring it back down or something like that. Or maybe you repeat the same exact thing 3 times and you have a punctuating idea on the 4th bar. This heavy repetition is typically something I'm not a real big fan of in metal, especially when it's paired with pedal tone writing, which the two of them go hand in hand with heavy metal, and it's one of my biggest hurdles with some of the older metal styles that were influenced from traditional heavy metal. Instead, we have riffs that are constantly moving forward who utilize pedal tones a bit more sparingly as a way to create juxtaposition between the moving melodic components. It is a way to create a rhythmic element to the melodic side, and is not the core function or the core mode that the riff exists within. The constant forward movement explores different harmonic ideas. There's usually 2 guitars going on at the same time. Sometimes we do hear some counterpoint, but more often than not, we hear harmony on it, and the harmony is not always a consistent interval either. It allows the distance between the 2 guitars to shift and change on each note, and it allows the song to have a wider emotional resonance to it and a wider harmonic palette. All of it comes together with the bass, who is constantly doing some sort of counterpoint against what the guitars are doing, rarely ever just resting on the bed of the song, playing some pedal tones to suggest the root note of whatever chord they're in. The bass is putting in a ton of work and is just as melodic and just as key to the secondary lead element. Well, no, it's the lead melody, because the vocals aren't melodious. Melodious? Melodious. That's the word, right? And we'll get to the vocals in a second, but they're mostly fixated on rhythm and texture. So the lead melody here are our guitars. They're harmonized, and there's usually some sort of counterpoint on the bass, doing something similar, constantly moving forward, larger ideas that get repeated rather than smaller ones, and light usage of pedal tone. All of it comes together into something that feels exceptionally metal in both its harmonic resonance and its general sound, its sonic characteristic, but feels like it takes inspiration from more varied genres. I don't necessarily want to point towards any one specific genre. There's a lot of genres that can work with more linearity in its melodic execution. It isn't something relegated to just one style. And even, I was going to point towards specifically classical because that's usually my cornerstone for that. But even classical can move into atmospheric, repetitive, emotional stuff. I'm not so interested in these driving, moving melodies that we tend to think about, because a lot of our discourse on classical music is the old greats, and that's sort of what they all made. But yeah, any genre can be open to, and I think this is just an example of what to me is true melodic death metal, and I know that feels a bit gatekeepery, and I'm real light on that. I don't necessarily think labels are all that important, but when I get presented a melodeath band, and it's just death metal with a little bit more focus on melody, like, I appreciate that for sure, and it is more melodic death metal. It earns its title, but it's not usually what I'm looking for. It's not what I'm expecting. And I've dropped my expectations over the years as I've become more accustomed with melodeath and what to expect from it. But this is what I would want. And I think it's the technical aspect. Technical death metal usually bounces off of me. Melodeath usually bounces off of me. But when we bring them together, I think that's where things start to click for me. Because we have the technical side but it doesn't feel like raw noodling that completely removes the emotional quality from the harmony, from the melody, from the harmonic aspect, and it brings that in from the melodic side. And so it is a bit more technical rhythmically and harmonically, but it also brings in those really nice melodies to pair with it, and it finds the balance between the two. And I think I gotta dig more into this. In the past, I've liked Melodeath and I've liked Tech Death, but there are very few bands within them that I'm like, I need to listen to more of this, and I think Inferi is scratching that itch. Now, I mentioned there's also the drums, and I think we should. Let's bring in the drums and the vocals together because they're all sort of in the same group here. No, no, they're not. Let's do the drums first. The drums are technically impressive. This is where a lot of the rhythmic technicality comes from. We get polyrhythm, we get polymeter, we get just ridiculous display of speed. I swear there's 30-second note kick drums in here at whatever 120 plus tempo they're at. Just the muscle and endurance requirement to perform this in the more straightforward extreme speed sections is ridiculous, and that's only half of the equation. You still have to have the split brain polymetric all my limbs are in a different time signature thing going on in the other half of the performance. I think this drummer may be one of my favorites. And it's not even just the technicality of it all, which is still impressive and makes my jaw drop at times, but there is this beautiful melodic component to the drumming in a couple of these sections. It's not a primary composition style for our drummer. I feel like the more traditional, straightforward death drumming is what we hear the most of. But across both of these tracks, which equals out to a little over 10 minutes, I think we heard 2 or 3 melodic drumming sections, which is where the drummer utilizes the drums in a more uh, melodic manner. Here I am describing things very acutely. That is to say, though, that drums are pitched. We don't usually think of that, but there is a key that we use to tighten or loosen, I think, the drum heads. And so when you hit them, they create a higher or a lower sound. And the toms are all the same way. And you can tune your drum kit if you would like, but that's not usually how I think most drummers think about it. It's just, I think most people have heard this. Uh, well, even the famous Phil Collins, da dun da dun da dun da dun 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 dun. It's falling, right? It's a cascading sound. We recognize that the pitch is lowering, and so if we perceive each drum instrument or each instrument of the drum kit to have a pitch to it, we can write melodies on it. And it's not usually how I hear it. I'm not going to say, oh, I could imagine this on a clarinet or something like that. No, but it's just that it's not the standard rigidity of saying, bass kick on 1 and 3, snare on 2 and 4, hi-hat on every hit, on every beat. And it has this rigid mathematical element to it. Melodic drumming tends to have a bit more feeling. There's movement all over the drums. Instruments are used not as a consistent element of a rhythm, but as a sound to be played across a larger idea. And there's actually, like I said, like 2 or 3 times we hear it in here, and I absolutely love it. Not only just because a lot of metal drummers don't go in that direction, but also just because I think it's very well executed here as well. And it's usually paired alongside what the guitars are doing, helping to accentuate specific movements, rising or falling action, or even to emphasize specific accent hits that the guitars and bass are doing. Because something I didn't really talk about is rhythm, which I suppose this is a nice time to bring up rhythm. A lot of the rhythm work in the guitar and bass are static, constant 16th notes or constant eighth notes. It isn't until we get to the solos that I feel like we play around with the length of notes to create rhythmic diversity in a melody. The standard mode of both of these tracks is driving momentum, and you do that with speed and execution and having the guitars constantly cranking out notes, 4 per every beat, just makes sense in having this energy and momentum. Um, and the drums help alongside the guitar and bass at emphasizing specific beats, maybe not necessarily in something rigid, like emphasizing every downbeat or offbeat, but emphasizing random-ish beats that it makes sense in the larger whole, but it's not a consistent rigidity of accents. And so this brings up a little bit of the rhythmic diversity that we need for this to not feel as boring as the constant 16th notes could very well get. And that's where the drums come in too, is helping to accentuate some of these beats and give a type of groove to the rather static rhythmic elements here. So I just really love the melodic side of the drumming there. And it works well against the technical side. Hey, the drums are both technical and melodic. Wow. So this then takes us to the vocals, which occupy a very similar space to the drums. They are both rhythmic and textural. We have a higher harsh and a lower harsh, and they are two very specific harshes and pitches and styles. There isn't, I don't think, a range between them. We either have the higher one or the lower one, and when the higher one comes in, it sounds like every other higher one, and when the lower one comes in, it sounds just like every other time they've gone lower. It sort of is like a drum kit. If you were to choose the snare or the low tom and you had no other options, you just precisely have either one or the other. And so our vocals are not exceptionally varied in a melodic way. However, having the two pitches allows us to layer them, allows us to bounce back and forth. At least to my ears, I never reach that vocal fatigue that I get when there's only one harsh vocal style and no other vocalists, which we hear in, I think, was it metalcore? Has death metal even has a lot of that, where your vocalist just has one pitch and they do it the whole album. And to me, it gets drowned out. I need a little bit more contrast, and this isn't a lot more, but it is enough to change where I'm listening to things. And they also have their layered, bringing both vocals in at the same time and getting a nice texture layering there. I think it sounds phenomenal when they do it. It's very impactful. What I wanted to bring it up specifically, though, is not just for the texture of it, but the rhythm. I look forward to this specific component of harsh vocals, and they don't usually come up. I think I've only mentioned this twice on my channel. I don't remember the first time, but I kind of remember the album art for it. Um, it was like a waterfall or something in front of a face mountain, and it looked ominous. My memory is also a bit hazy, so I could be wrong on that, but I think if I saw it, I'd be like, that's the album! The other one is Archspire. And of course, what I'm getting here is flow, which we typically attribute to rappers, but I absolutely love in harsh vocalists. I think if you're going to choose to exclude melody and focus exclusively on rhythm, you should make your rhythms interesting. Now, of course, different bands have different goals, different styles of music have different, goals that they're aiming for. Not every single style of music needs to do this, but it also means that I don't need to listen to every style of music with harsh vocals. And honestly, this is a make or break point for me. If you have one style of vocal and you're not rhythmically interesting, I'm kind of writing off the vocals as a whole. It may be well executed harshes, they're just not interesting to my ear. And the vocals here are so good. There are so many rhythmic switch ups, changing in speed, changing in the rhythmic pattern, whether it's quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, working within other sorts of tuplets like five, working as a counter rhythm or a polyrhythm against what the drums are doing or what the guitars are doing. There's just so many moments, and of course, at the end of Maelstrom Prison, we began to see these rapid fire 16th notes just constantly coming out really fast, syllables from both vocal styles, and they're done in such a way, production wise, that there's a clarity to them. I couldn't tell you what was being said, but a lot of the times when you have the lower growls, it can kind of get muddied up, and those really quick, choppy attacks could just sound like one big long growl. And so, I mean, the same thing happens with the bass kicks, right? When we get those 30-second notes, it'd be really easy for them to be muddy enough that it just sounds like one long note. And the production comes in and really cleans it up and puts space between each of them, which there's not a lot of space to make there, but they do it. And so I think the producer, alongside the band itself, deserves a lot of praise for the clarity and impact of a lot of the faster, lower stuff going on here. They just have a real great ear for that. But yeah, the vocals coming through at the end and saying, you've heard us switch it up. We've done triplets. We have changed our flow in the middle of a line. We're going to go for raw speed, raw technicality. Check this out. And it's only one vocalist, right? So they do both styles at this speed. Um, yeah, the whole thing just blows me away. It's technical on a level that engages me and doesn't feel noodly. And I really wish there was a way to explain that. I think I've brought this up with bands in the past where I'm like, yeah, it's technical, my jaw's on the floor, like I'm trying to imagine playing it. The performative side is just as interesting as the raw listening experience to the pure music. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't click with me. It's an interesting performance, but it's not music or art that I'm, emotionally connecting with. Or even, was it mentally? I don't know. I don't think emotionally engaging is accurate here either, but it's clicking with me. I'm enjoying it. And like I said, I wish there was a way I could describe what the difference was. Where is the line drawn between too technical and not technical enough? And why does that line get shifted per genre? I've listened to some classical stuff that if it were a rock band, I might write it off. There's not necessarily a rule that I only like more technical music. And I really wish I could figure it out. But I've learned a lot of stuff about my musical tastes and biases on this on this journey, especially looking at these genres that I had zero experience prior. And I think listening to them, it's opened up my ears to, well, and my mind to what I enjoy. And more specifically, why I enjoy what I enjoy and what specific elements of music I enjoy that I didn't know before. And maybe in a couple more years, I'll be able to speak about why some things that are technical work for me and why some things that aren't technical work for me and where the line's drawn and what differentiates things. I'm on quite a bit of tangent right here, though, so I'm going to hit some lyrics for both of these. And then we're going to move on to Simian Hive, which just, what a title. Kicking it off with No Gods But Our Flesh. I just gotta say, if I waxed poetically about the music, I could do the same about the raw lyricism going on, the poetry of the lyrics. I mean, I just want to read this opening stanza for you, and it set me up completely to fully appreciate what was going forward. It says, Aeons have passed since the ghosts in the sky breathed souls into simians birthing mankind, traces untrodden, their faces forgotten, whilst men are besodden, bewitched by their machines. Just the flow of it, the way that it works, all these interline rhymings, the raw vocabulary on display, it is just as aggressively balletic as the music is. It has an air of elegance, much like the music that's hidden underneath the aggression and rawness of the topic. It's such a good match for this music. I mean, we're going to get into the theme here, which overall is the combination of man and machine, the modern landscape of digitization of lives and such, not being able to pull ourselves away from the digital world, the online world, our phones, our computers, all of that. But even aside from that, I just think that this concept of aggressive beauty, aggressive elegance, that the images being brought into my mind, right, doesn't necessarily say that, man had evolved. It says that it's been eons since the ghosts in the sky breathed soul into the simians birthing mankind. It's a very specific imagery and a very specific way of talking about this concept. And it comes from the vocabulary and the flow of the meter, and all of that. It is elegant and raw all at the same time in a way that the music is as well. And just that bass pairing right there, I think, is such a perfect fit. Now, on to the themes at large. I mean, our chorus says revolution, a new era of man is at hand. Fusion of mind and machine, the perfect being. Evolution, the singularity progress. There are no gods but our flesh. I mean, it's very clearly stated right there. We're talking about the next evolution of mankind, which includes artificiality, synthetic components, and a digitization of thought. Oh, this was another good stanza. Modern marvels combined with an ancient artifact, emerald effervescence sparked the digital sentience transcendence, implementing of a new kind, enter the human hive mind. Just the way that these syllables flow and even these inter-word rhymes, which isn't even just rhyming within a specific line, opposed to rhyming always at the end of lines, but sort of having the last syllable of a word start a rhyming scheme that begins with the next word. So we sort of have like a homophone concept going on with two words that normally aren't too similar, but because they flow together in a way, they sound phenomenal just rolling off it's just so elegant. That's what I'm talking about. It's so good. Um, but yeah, the final stanza talks about how it's this digitization of everything, even bringing up the specific concept of AI, which this came out in 2021. So certainly hot on the heels of AI coming out and doing. We already had AI assistants with stuff like Siri and Hey Google and stuff. And it was right at the cusp of stuff like ChatGPT, I think. So lyrics are very appropriate for the time. But it says integrated into society, currency, and hive mind psychiatry, cybernetic life form invasion of unknown source, it guides the course of Earth's future without remorse. And of course, we have source, course, and remorse there at varying lengths of rhythmic pacing throughout. It's so good. It lacks the brutal utilitarian writing that we tend to find in death metal, and replaces it with something exceptionally elegant. And I honestly think a lot of this would even work outside of the music, just being written poetry. There is some really nice lines here. But yeah, that's what that track is about. And you probably already guessed it. I'm not seeing too much of a crossover between the musical themes and lyrical themes. We have some phenomenal technical melodic death metal, and we have songs about merging of artificiality and why can't I think of natural? Is that what we call humans? I don't know. It doesn't have a nice ring to it. The artificiality and the natural. I am certainly not a wordsmith like this person is. Um, but yeah, there's nothing like that in the music. And when it comes to death metal, I don't typically expect that. Death metal has a very specific sound, so unless you're writing music that has that aggressive, or sorry, you're writing lyrics that have that aggressiveness to it, it you don't really get the benefit of merging theme like that. And it's sort of something I expect with the genre, like I said. Definitely, I'm not removing points or counting it against them in any way, but I will be surprised if anything really connects that way moving forward. Maelstrom Prison is about a ruler who gets thrown off of his throne. That's pretty good. Thrown off of his throne. That was okay. And he says at one point, "Sealed away, none possess the might to slay, but betrayed, cast away and frayed and left to decay." They didn't outright kill him. They just took him off the throne and threw him outside the city or whatever. Um, and then he gets a prophecy from an oracle that he needs to have progeny. And so he begins to manufacture a being into reality. And the way that it's spoken, specifically with the word manufacturing, and then later on saying that calls it a flourishing vessel, artificial and autonomous, yet intertwined, we are still working with the idea of the flesh and the machine as one. He creates several of these children. I don't necessarily know what to call them. He specifically calls them my spawn, but they join the ranks of advisories and top of the line people in the government and kill them all, take revenge, and allow this ruler to come back into power. That's what I get out of this one. But once again, there's some stanzas I just need to look at real quick. Um, so here's one I like. This was when he was creating one of his spawn. He says, "The gleaming tesseract, prime replication of the divine contents that lay within my mind. In my absence it shall wake, rise to retake in fervent state, decimate those who dare to displace." We have the constant long A sound in decimate, displace, state, wake, and retake, but it's also interwoven with this long I where we have primed, divine, mind, rise. And it's just so intertwined in a way that we have this double layering of rhymes throughout this entire stanza. I mean, it is just so good. I wish I could write words this well. I feel like one of the reasons I stray away from vocal work in my own music is not just because I'm not a great singer. I think I'm passable for like rock or something. I'm never going to say that I'm a really strong singer. My lyrics are garbage though, and I know they are. um, and just it's always what I fear most is just empty, vapid words taking up space because I wanted a vocal line. And stuff like this is just like, I'm so envious of the ability to write like this. It is just gorgeous. I mean, even this final stanza, he says, "These distant memories replay obsessively, hauntingly, daunting my sanity, my immortality staves off fatality." The vocabulary is phenomenal, but it's also how that vocabulary gets used. There's this understanding, almost an innate understanding of how syllables work in flow, in expression. These words could literally mean absolutely nothing to me, and it would still sound phenomenal because of the way that all the syllables play around each other, the repetition of them, the bouncing back and forth of what's being repeated, what's being rhymed. It's just... it's so good. Alright. Now that I'm done gushing about this dude's poetry, let's dive into Simian Hive. See what's going on with this track. That dual guitar line was so good. Oh, there is a little bit of pitch variation in his higher harsh. See this heavy pedal tone section. It's just a really nice contrast to what we hear otherwise. It's not overused. Has a very soundtrack feel to it, which I forgot to bring up about the previous two tracks. I feel like a lot of these sections can be felt in both the 3 and the 4. really big soundtrack. Oh, those cymbals were offbeat triplet hits. I'm gonna roll it over. I honestly don't want to stop there. I just want to listen to the whole thing straight. I'll have so many notes, it'll be so boring just listening to me talk for an hour straight. So I'll probably stop at the end of this track. Wonderful guitar line. The swirling energy of the cyclical rising and falling with the rising intensity of what's happening around it. See, really interesting accents. A real sinister element to this section. A sort of clarity from out of that intensity and overwhelming weight. The dual guitars with the arpeggiating bass in the middle is so good. Wonderful. One quick thing, I mentioned No Gods But Our Flesh was the title track and it kicked our reaction off, and I was wrong. The title of the album is Vile Genesis, which is our next track, and I have no idea how I got that mixed up. So I'm sure people already hit me up in the comments. They're like, nah, dude, you were wrong back then. Like, I know, that was like 40 minutes ago. So I know people comment while they're watching, which I appreciate. Kind of get their thoughts as they go through it too, which I think is kind of cool. But yeah, you may get to this point, you're like, oh, he did catch it. Don't delete your old comment. uh, I find it appreciated to know that people are ready to correct me when I'm wrong. Because honestly, like I've said many times in the past, I learned just as much from y'all telling me about this music as probably some of you get out of me breaking this stuff down. The other thing is that was a highly repetitive ending. And aside from the sheer length of it, I do think it's interesting that I enjoyed that compared to Opeth's Deliverance, which, yeah, Opeth really decided to take that one idea like for 3 minutes, and this was 30 seconds tops. But I think something that helps a lot is the context. This is an elongated, repetitive, rhythmically jagged ending that is 30 seconds out of 20 minutes I've heard so far. It is comparatively a small amount of the music, and that ending to Deliverance may have felt less comically exaggerated to me if I had heard it in the middle of an album more so than the song as in a vacuum, because it took up 30% of that track where it might only take up 5%, 3% of the album as a whole, in which case it would stand out less. And that's one of the ways that it's better to appreciate and listen to this music in the capacity it was originally intended, which is as an album. And to be fair, I don't ever listen to music singles basically, unless I'm checking out a new single drops from an upcoming album. Like I'm interested. I gotta check that out. But if I'm listening to music casually, it's a whole album. That's how I've always been. I'm not a fan of making playlists or checking out one song at a time. I'm an album guy. So if it makes any of y'all feel better, listening to just one song in a vacuum is something I don't do and never have. And it still feels kind of weird doing reactions in that manner because it's just not the way I normally engage with art. Alright, with all that said, these two previous tracks. Simian Hive, I think, is interesting because it relied on pedal tone a lot more and utilized the more traditional death metal riffage after I just praised them for having a vast majority of longer, more linear driving melodic sections. They they come at me with, I think it was our very first verse was just a single pedal tone 16th notes for like 3 bars straight, and then a little run at the end on bar 4, and then looping it back and just like hammering home this one note. And the more I listened, I was like, oh yeah, this riff is pedal tone heavy. This one's pedal tone heavy. This one's like 80% pedal tone. I'm like, of course, y'all are going to put that song right after I praised y'all for more linear writing. But, it's about the contrast. I was getting a little tired of it towards the end of the track, but compared to the 10 minutes prior to that, which is exceptionally melodic and flowy, having this feels like a bit of a break away from that and a focus on something a bit more heavier, which helps Simian Hive stand out a bit from the previous two tracks. And as I was just talking about, sometimes these decisions work better in the context of the album. So I mean, I guess what I'm getting at here is on my single song reactions, take most of what I say with a grain of salt because I'm listening to that stuff in the wrong context. Because if y'all had given me Simian Hive, I kind of would have written off Inferi a little bit. Might have been interested in some aspects, but would not have had a taste of one of my favorite parts of them, which is their melodic writing. Polymeter. I've mentioned twice now, at least, possibly thrice, that many of these sections can be felt in both a 3 feel and a 4 feel, and I've been kind of questioning what the base mode of their writing probably is. Is this like Meshuggah, where they write everything in 4/4 and just the idea of how many bars fit into a phrase is weird. They're like 27 and a half bars for this phrase. It'll add up next time when we get to bar 54. That's when we'll line up and actually end a phrase at the end of a bar. Um, or are they constantly changing back and forth depending on what pattern fits best? Many of the times that I conduct out a 4 and a 3, one of them certainly is a bit more prominently displayed in the rhythmic aspects than the other. And I found the last time that I was conducting through it, it was easier to do a couple bars of the 3 and then switch off to the 4 as the band kind of hit a semi halftime feel, which was actually shifting to the 4/4. But what actually makes more sense to me is that a lot of this is probably written in 12/8, and 12/8 is just incredibly easy to write both 3 and 4 feels within without ever having to change time signatures or write phrases across bars. It supports both 3 groupings of 4 and 4 groupings of 3 in a way that feels very natural. And that's probably what's happening here. Uh, I'm kind of curious if I can get some insight. Maybe there's some official tabs out there, like an official music book from them. I don't know if that's still very popular. I used to see a lot of that in like the 2000s. I don't know if people still make tab books anymore, like official ones from the bands. Um, Maybe someone's got an interview from them. They just happen to be talking about meter. I don't really see that as a huge talking point for a lot of music journalists. That feels a bit more niche of a topic. But I'm kind of curious if there's been any information out there because 12/8 is what I'm leaning on, but it's not necessarily what they did. Now, there is a cinematic soundtrack style thing going on that I completely omitted when we hit our analysis last time. There are strings and synths and choirs and brass existing outside of our metal band from time to time, and it makes specific sections feel larger than in a way that doesn't feel very classical. It is much like your iterative symphonic bands that bring in a string section just to play chords around your metal bands in a way that sounds perfectly fine but doesn't bring any classical influence or compositional elements into the metal writing. It's purely for that classical flair to support the metal bands. And that's what's going on here. I don't really hear any classical influence in it. It's simply just usually power chords, it sounds like, from orchestral instruments or a choir in a way that makes the section sound larger than life and very cool, and it's quite effective. I love those moments, even if in some other context this might be a negative talking point for me. I do kind of wish there was more classical stuff going on, but honestly, these sections are so full. I don't know that they could support more lines without having a completely different production aspect going on, in which case you're going to have a song or even a section that feels production wise and sonically exceptionally different from the rest of the stuff just based on how things are EQ'd and distanced and placed in the sound sphere, that it's going to feel exceptionally disjointed. And there are some rough transitions in here, but on the whole, I say that they work with fluidity as a primary goal in the majority of their writing. That they don't want this like split apart element between their larger orchestral sections and their more straightforward metal ones. So I appreciate what they're doing, and like I said, it's effective. It makes the section sound good. Um, so again, there's another thing that in some context I'll criticize and in some I'll praise. I guess it's all down to execution, but again, I don't know where the line is drawn. So, man, this band is getting me to question a lot of a lot of my biases in ways that I don't have answers for today, but I hope I will in the future. I'll continue to explore this stuff. Something interesting, though, going alongside this idea is that the orchestral elements always act in unity. There isn't a string section and a brass section who are doing two different things. It is, here's a power chord, and power chord is just a root and an octave, which is kind of the same note, and the fifth, which is the most stable interval. Your root and your fifth is exceptionally stable. It sounds great all the time. One of the reasons guitar elevated to, or rock elevated to, gravitated towards this is because it's so stable, it can be distorted without creating a lot of dissonance and clashing sounds. And that's the power chord. Anyways, you play your power chord and it almost feels like they say, well, what instruments do we want to be doing this outside? And like some sections, like bring a choir in, so they just drag the choir sample on and we have a choir doing a power chord. And other times they're like, how about string and brass? And you just drag the string and brass on it, and now that's that. There isn't ever a moment where I hear different parts of their expanded instrumentation doing different things. It's always this chordal stuff on the outside of the band, and all the instruments are doing the same. And I think the most I've heard is just two sections, choir and string and brass. I think those are the only combinations I've heard. I've heard isolated strings, isolated choir. I don't think I've heard layering up of three sections yet, but they always move as one. It almost feels like there is one MIDI line for it, and they just drag what instruments they want that to sound it. It's not going to be multiple lines though. So again, the simplicity of it. There's so much complexity elsewhere that bringing in complexity there is going to require a different approach to production, and I've already went into all that. The last thing that I want to talk about in this set is solos, which are very cool. First of all, they are tastefully noodly in a way that I think just barely walks the line of being excessively technical while still having a bit of breadth and pause and pacing to it. There are some sections that are just blasting through 16th notes consistently, but usually even in those solos they'll take a moment here and there to pause it, hold out a note, play a note, and allow a rest after it, to have a little break. And I appreciate the flow and fluidity of these. Once again, we're not looking at a band that breaks up their solos into 4-bar phrases where you can cleanly hear where they're moving from one idea to the next. Everything flows into one another, much like their more melodic melody, much like their more melodic riffs that we hear throughout, where it's one extended idea, and that's what the solos feel like. But on top of that, there's something really cool going on in the solos that I don't hear too many bands do. You either have a solo or you have a duet. And the duet is usually going to be a harmony, right? Avenged Sevenfold does this often. I don't know why that's the first band that popped into my head, but it is. Both guitarists will play the same thing with different pitches, and that'll be the whole solo. They don't come in and out. Like the solo section is a duet. They're playing the same melody. This band doesn't do that. It's really cool because the solo will have these key moments. Could be a grouping of 2 notes, 3 notes, 5 notes, usually just one little segment of the larger idea, and another guitarist will come in and harmonize that little portion. Leave come back a bar later, harmonize this little portion, leave, come back 3 bars later and harmonize this portion, take a rest, then harmonize this portion, and leave for like 6 bars and come back and harmonize this portion. And it's almost like when you're talking to somebody and you really want to emphasize this moment, and this moment, and you put that extra emphasis on this, right? And it allows you to bring attention to that specific word or phrase or whatever you're working with. And that's what it sounds like here, almost as if they're putting a little bit more bite on specific sounds in order to say, hey, check this out and check that out. And other than just sounding cool, I don't know if there's a purpose to it. Maybe there's something really cool going on there compositionally that I'm not picking up on. Maybe those are specific intervals. Maybe those are specific. Well, sometimes they happen when we have key changes or mode changes, and I think that's really nice too, to draw attention to, hey, things are changing up a little bit here. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it feels just sort of random what they're accenting, but I enjoy it. It allows the second guitar to join into the solo in a way that isn't just both guitarists playing their own thing. Speaking of, the dual guitar work on this track was phenomenal. Same with Simian Hive. We had some really nice dual guitar lines working with counterpoint, especially when the bass got to come in the middle and do something a bit more standard. We had rising arpeggios at one point. We had rising and falling walking bass lines. But providing a melodic approach to a foundation against the other two guitars, and also the way that they're placed, where the two guitars are pushed hard left, hard right, and then we have a hard center bass, just all of it coming together so good. Oh man. Really, the three-way melodic writing in this is going to keep me going through this whole album. All right. I know there wasn't anything specific about these two songs, I think, here, but like I mentioned at the beginning, a lot of what they're doing well and what I would normally talk about in a single song reaction is what I spoke about in our opening 2 tracks. It's the solid guitar work, it's the melody writing, it's the melodic drumming, it's the vocal variety. So, going forward, I'm sure that those are going to be the things I enjoy most about these next 4 tracks. Just remember that I'm implying silently that I love all of that stuff. And so if you hear it in the next track, you're like, hey, you didn't bring up that the guitar work was awesome. Like, the guitar work in all this album is awesome. I try to find new things to talk about so I'm not repeating myself as often and trying to keep these a bit on the shorter side. I know not a lot of people have 3 to 5 hours to watch me dig into an album, and if I can stop myself from repeating a few things and tighten the pacing up a bit, I try to do that. With that said, let's dive into some lyrics for these 2 tracks, and we'll keep going. Simian Hive is about the overlord of the digital domain, the person who controls everyone, who has been sucked into the world of, social media and stuff. I really like this one line, though. It says, insatiable, escapists consume, rest, and resume. I love this because we have consume and rest. Consume has the sum on the end that we'll see in resume, but resume also starts with rest, the rest sound. So we actually take consume and rest and merge them together to get a double rhyme, one on the first syllable and one on the second. It's so good. How does he do it? But anyways, he talks about how everybody's being mind controlled by the digital modern landscape. Ceaseless autopilot, mindless drones become clones destined to be fodder for the seeds that have been sown. He says, I have total influence over everybody because they refuse to get out of their devices, and I rule them through their devices. Later on, there's quite a few stanzas just sort of talking about how awesome he is for having come up with this ingenious plan, sort of. But by the end, it seems that it's all done as a way to appease the gods through ritual sacrifice. It says it's nearly complete. This ziggurat shall be the means of liberation from your transcendental cosmic cell by blessed blood. These Simians shall receive the gifts of the Revenant recreated in thy image. So he's brainwashed everybody to do what he wants, which is going to be this ritual suicide here. I really like this final line, or this final stanza. The imagery of it, I think, is really interesting. It says, starved of divinity, humanity leeched, fed by their ghosts, control has been reached. Puppets shall hang by their throats under the weight towed by their strings. Dang, that's good. But yeah, that's what this one's about. Once again, still talking about where the digital and the flesh meet, where man meets machine. This one, once again, still looking at a bit of a negative take on it, although less fantastical as Maelstrom Prison and a little bit more of social commentary. Although Maelstrom Prison could also be social commentary if we take out the idea. I know we're going backwards for a second, but I had read it as just a really nice sci fi story. I say nice, it's about creating digital robotic spawn in order to infiltrate your opposition and slaughter them. But it's a it's a good sci-fi story, but also the idea of creating people through the means of digitization could also be a look at the radicalization of people through online spaces. And, having you be some sort of commander for them, telling them what they need to do, and them going and enacting your will in spaces that they have infiltrated is also something that happens too often today, I feel. So, going back on it, maybe it's not as fantastical as I had originally seen. It's just that the layer of metaphor was a little bit thicker than some of the more straightforward social commentary seen in No Gods But Our Flesh and now Simian Hive. Moving on to From Exile to Exaltation. And before we get into that, is this a concept album? So here's the deal. This ritual sacrifice is to bring forth a deity who wants to move from exile to exaltation, as our title, as the name of the song suggests. This is also something we saw in Maelstrom Prison. Somebody who was on the throne and cast away, sealed away was actually a specific word there. Sealed away and none could kill. Is this God, the one coming back to us in track 4 here, the same one that was cast aside in Maelstrom Prison and the one talking to us in Simian Hive? The people that he crafted and mind controlled and all of this in order to bring him back, it all kind of fits together in one story here. I don't know, it might not be. These could all be separate stories of the merging of man and machine, which is a recurrent theme, but it's also something that I feel like I can read this lineage of uh, events in a way that fit together in a cohesive story. That's kind of cool, I suppose. Anyways, this one is literally about this god breaking through from this dimension of being sealed and coming back into this one with a mission in mind that he will use the people that he has brainwashed into achieving. As usual, there's just some really fantastic lines here, not just on a purely linguistic level, but also imagery. Just, I highly recommend. If any of the lyrics that I have specifically spoken about, or if the story as a whole is interesting to you, go to Genius or Sonic Hits or probably Metal Archives, whatever your home lyric website is, and go look this up. There's too many good lines in here for me to talk about specifically. There's this one line though, it says, "Centuries of plotting now at long last, this destiny shall come to pass from the clutches of exile. To revival arise, reprise that which was deprived." God, that's such a good way to end that stanza. Why? There was one more good one. If I can't find it real quick, we're just going to push forward. I wish I could drag and highlight more than one line at a time. We need, well, I know Edge does it. I was going to say we need a web browser that allows me to highlight or circle things. I know Edge allows you to draw on the page, but I'm not using Edge. Yeah, I can't find it. There's another good one though. Oh, here it is. "And from the vaporous vortex of eternal imprisonment, the deity's immensity spews through the sky with magnificence." Just the picture that paints. The kind of breaking of the veil, what that veil looks like, this God coming through into our plane. It's just so good. Interestingly, one thing that I'm not sure is too important but might come up later is that a lot of the sacrificed, I'm going to assume, came back to life. It says, "Disoriented in a state of vast darkness, graveless corpses jolt back to life, bewildered masses awaiting drudgery. Minds untethered awakening as though it were all just a dream, they bear witness with their final moments of consciousness." So yeah, they died, and then they came back, and then they saw this God coming through this vortex in the sky. So yeah, we have these zombies here as well, and they seem to be untethered though. So he mentions later that the brainwashed are going to do his deeds, but these who were part of the ritual sacrifice are no longer brainwashed. In an interesting turn of events, usually we would talk about these people as zombies, which, I mean, was even the whole point of Night of the Living Dead. I might be wrong on that one. Day of the Dead. One of them, whatever the one was in the mall. George Romero likened it to the zombies of consumerism, which was the whole point. He put zombies in a mall. People just mindlessly walking from store to store, buying stuff they don't need. The idea that the zombies are the ones who are not brainwashed and have their own way of thinking is a really nice turn, a nice twist here, if that's the direction they're going to go in. I don't know. We have to keep pushing forward to find out, don't we? I don't know why I said it that way. I don't know. I like having fun here, and sometimes fun means I'm using funny voices. So we're going to move on to the real title track this time, Vile Genesis, and see what's going on there. A nice scream. This beast just came through a vortex and just lets out this growl, finally free. Such a tasty riff. So yeah, that's a 16-bar riff right there that is 90% forward moving new ideas. I think that's the first time I picked up a unusual phrasing. I got 12 beats there in that last section. Oh, well, that's 12 beats in 4 though. Which is still 12 beats in 3, but at least it's 4 bars instead of 3 bars. So it'll feel a little more natural, a little more normal. We don't have too many of these. We had that one moment in the middle of Maelstrom Prison. I think that was a bit more atmospheric, bit of a short bass gets to shine again. Now that's certainly the point of these moments. Oh, beautiful. Alright, I know we've been doing groupings of 2, but I want to talk about this topic real quick. I want to listen to the album again. Not necessarily exclusively because I enjoy it, which I do. I don't know how long I can enjoy it. I'll tell you, I'm getting a little fatigued here. This, much like a lot of heavier music, is draining for me. Some of my favorite albums, though, that I've found, I guess over the last 2 years, though, have been draining for me to listen to, and sometimes I listen to them in groupings. The first half now, take a break, come back for the second half later. And Archspire is one of them. This level of technical death metal is a lot. um, but I do want to come back to this for one very specific reason, which is listening to the music, knowing what each track is generally about. Maybe even having the lyrics in front of me while it's playing to hear what kind of music is going on and around specific stanzas, because there are 2 to 3 solos in each of these tracks. I think that's consistent. I think we have at least 2 in each track, and some of them have 3. And what do those solos mean? What do they come after narratively? For instance, in this track, we kick it off with a growl or a scream, some sort of harsh, though, just long and held out. It's pretty much the only time in the album I think I've heard something that isn't rhythmically syncopated from the vocals. We don't really have a lot of moments of held out notes. And of course, we just finished a track that ended with this beast, this god coming in from another dimension after being stuck there and trapped for who knows how long, assuming that this is still a concept album. Um, and that whatever we saw in track 2 is the same that we were hearing from in track 3 and seeing come out of this vortex in track 4. It's almost like stretching your legs, right? You've been cramped up on an airplane for so long and you get out and you just got to stretch your body. Like everything needs to take up space now. And this, I feel this concept is similar in any fantasy or sci-fi film where we have, powerful beings trapped in small cosmic spaces. The first thing they do when they get out is, especially if they have a more demonic voice, is scream or yell. One, I think it is them stretching, but two, it's to show their power, how loud they can be to the audience so that they know what kind of threat level this is, that kind of deal. Um, Dragons. You meet a dragon, they wake up, what's the first thing they do? They growl and breathe fire at you, right? It's kind of like stretching, it's kind of intimidating, it's all wrapped up into one. That's what goes on here. That opening yell, growl, harsh, is a unique aspect of the album, and it exists because of its narrative purpose. How much else in the music am I what else in the music am I missing through that context? We have this extended bass solo in the middle in a rather quiet ambient section that we did allude to once earlier, I believe, in Maelstrom Prison. 8 bars, maybe tops, of a quieter section for the bass to shine, although it might have been No Gods But Our Flesh. Um, I don't know, the songs do kind of run together a bit. They, like I said at the beginning, I expect them to do what they do well, and each song is, they do what they do. They're not trying to change up anything from track to track here. But these quieter sections, sparser instrumentation, and bass highlights is a rarity, and why does it pop up here? What happens in this track that leans into that? Most of this is straightforward tech death, and like I mentioned, I'm not sure that there's going to be any strong correlation between the music and the lyrics, but that doesn't mean that it's exclusively never going to line up, and it's possible that some of the lyrics do match specifically the emotion or flavor that the guitar riff in that moment is bringing to the table. Is it faster? Is it slower? Is it focusing on more melodic aspects? Or is it super chuggy and syncopated pedal tone stuff like what we heard at the end here? This is, once again, really only the second time we've leaned heavy into heavily syncopated pedal tone ideas with Simian Hive's entire song kind of being that, which makes sense now that I think about it. It's about bass line standing in line with a series of, as he calls them, clones or copies or clowns or something along those lines. Everybody's the same though because he controls them. The rigidity of that, the lack of contrast. Like, yes, it makes sense there, but it only makes sense now in retrospect because I know what the song is about. And like I said, how much of this am I missing? So yeah, I mean, that's a. I probably could have just said, "Hey, I want to listen to this again," because sometimes the lyrics make sense. But I really want to showcase some examples of that. This isn't just purely death metal music with some really cool poetry on top of it. While it's not a consistent element, it seems, at least on my first listen, there are several sections in here that I feel do line up a bit more cohesively than I originally figured. And I do want to hear it again, at least with the general topics in mind. You know, Exile to Exaltation is about coming through a vortex. Maelstrom Prison is about being betrayed and locked away. Simian Hive is about making, it's about brainwashing people. What is it in the music that might allude to this? Yes, it's all going to be aggressive death metal, but there are nuances in their approach to death metal that might lean into them, into the topics a bit more from one track to another. So, like I said, that's a lot of words to say something rather simple, but I did want to point out some specific examples if, in case anybody wasn't sure what I meant by that. I suppose while we're stopped, I'm going to look at some lyrics. I don't know how we're going to do the rest of this. I'll just play it by ear. We may run all three together if I don't have a lot to talk about in between 6 and 7. It's also kind of weird to do two and then just have one last track at the end. So I don't like, so we're going to play it by ear. Let me look up some lyrics. And this track continues on from where we just were. Jumping forward quite a bit of time, though, we see a war has taken place between, as he calls them, the primitive untethered, which I wonder if that is a combination of just people who were already unhooked previously and with the undead untethered. They came back. Um, Graveless corpses jolt back to life. Yeah, I mean, that's zombies right there. I was wondering if maybe I just misread it and he referred to people who weren't already tethered in as zombies, but no. Literally says that they're dead but didn't have a grave, mass corpse style, or mass grave style. Um, so yeah. Anyways, there is the side that opposes this. He calls them the primitive untethered, and the other tribe is those who heed my command. And it talks about how this goes on for such a long time. In fact, I think this is the most amount of lyrics in any song, despite it. Well, it is the third longest track. We're going to end with our two longest, with 7 and 8, but yeah, we're still at 5:45, which is longer than anything we've heard so far. It just feels like there was a lot of lyrics to get through when I ran through this. But it says that as my side dwindles, I take their corpses and reanimate them. Maybe possibly with a little dash of a mechanical element to it, bringing the robotic side in. Um, but it doesn't quite state that. Just says he brings them back for his war. He says, "Not even the dead have seen the end of war." I really like that line. Also calls himself a connoisseur of corpses, which I think is an interesting description. But it's not wrong. If that's a resource you have at hand, you'll certainly be collecting them and bringing them back. But by the end of this, we have this massive battle. Takes course over this full 6 minutes of song, but could be years, decades. Overwhelmed, outnumbered, outmatched, the primitive are dispatched. Cascaded by our ceaseless assault, the rebellion is brought to a halt. And he says that he encages them. forces them to bow before him. He says, bow before your king. Interesting, he says, enslaved by their own. Really great line right there. And that's how it ends. The final stanza says, my sleepwalkers engulf the earth while my bloodline has given birth to a vile genesis. And as usual, I got up there. Man, where was that line? I always have to pick out a stanza or so, just because there's so many good ones. And I can't find it, which is kind of garbage. How did I lose it? It was one. It wasn't even like the last time where I had multiple I wanted to check out. I think I'm just going to move on as to not waste too much time here. Just a really nice... Oh, yeah, it's the first stanza. That's why I kept skipping over it. Anyways, it says, there is but one last bastion of man to be seized. Surrender or bleed. What began as a covert campaign ends with soil soaked with crimson rain from the slain. Their deaths were in vain, their bane my disdain. Obviously, we have the Ain idea here at the end that's constantly going through, but we also have the seized and bleed at the beginning of this. We have soil soaked with crimson rain. I really like the way that we kind of run from crimson, already have that R sound rolling up into rain, creating a soft type of alliteration before taking the ain from rain to go with slain, vain, bane, and disdain. It's just usual. It's beautiful. I mean, we're talking about slaughtering millions of people, but it's beautifully written. It's that elegant brutality. That's probably going to be the description at the beginning of this video title. Elegant brutality. Composer reacts to Inferi. Alright. 3 more to go. Like I said, we're going to play this by ear. I don't know when I will pause next, but it really depends on if I have new topics to talk about, because for the most part, if it regards the music generally, I've already gone over that. I spoke like 30 minutes of it at the beginning, so I don't want to bring any of that back up. It's got to be a new topic. Yeah, that was the only thing I wrote down. Alright, let's dive into this, moving forward with Mesmeric Horror. Interesting. Yeah, so this is 16, but I think our previous one was 18. But that might have just been the holdover as a transition. Oh. I would love more of this. A lead guitar under the vocals while we have the rhythm guitar on the outside. Yeah, nice little triplet idea there to wrap that up rhythmically. Solo, duet, solo. Yeah, and the vocals came in over the solo. I love that. This is only the third time we've had one of these bass-led smaller sections of solo and short, much like our first one. Just this marching forward, this rigidity. That 7/8, so it gives us that hiccup there. I feel like we're rushing into the next bar. The snare is all over the place with the accents there. Whoa! I love that gap. That was in our opening idea too. Oh, talking about a harsh stop there. Ooh. We have a split. We have two orchestral lines going on. This is a first. And I suppose it makes sense. Carving thine kingdom. Just so big. And look at that volume. Just static, not moving. Ooh, very funky. smoothing it up a little bit, slowing it down. Coming in with all the power, all the layers, all the harshes. It was a nice chime run right before coming into this. Seeing here, the whole orchestra's moving as one. A fade out. I'm kind of stunned. Not that I think the fade out was the wrong way to go, but I just wouldn't expect this band to do a fade out. The only reason I'm stopping is to give my ears a break. I was I was more accurate than I thought, thinking that I was getting a bit fatigued here, and I probably could push through for another 7 to finish out the album, but it would most certainly be let's get it over with kind of attitude, and I don't want that going into the final track. Not to mention, I kind of want to know where we're at in the story to see how it wraps up in our ending. I feel like a lot has gone on here. We took over the planet, and then we had a mesmeric horror, which could go in a lot of directions, and then carving thine kingdom, making this planet his own. I feel like I need to get that story together before I look at what the heirs of the descent is, which I think from his perspective would be interesting for him to view his own reign as a descent. So since a lot of the album, I think all the album has been from this god's perspective, I'm going to assume that descent would be an overtaking. maybe the primitive untethered have found a way to take him down. I don't know. Like I said, a lot could have gone on, and I want to make sure I'm in the right mindset for that one, but I also need a little bit of a break, and taking 10 to 15 minutes to read some lyrics and talk about them, I think is going to be enough to refresh me a little bit and get ready for these final 7 minutes. So I'm going to do that right here. I don't have anything to say about the music. It's continuing to do what they do very well. And pretty much, if you need to know my thoughts on these last two tracks, just head back to, like, I don't know, minute 10 of this video and listen to what I said after No Gods But Our Flesh. Well, speaking of shifting perspective, which I didn't think they were going to do, we have shifted perspective. Mesmeric horror takes place from the perspective of somebody who is still in the resistance, who weren't captured in the war between the primitive untethered and those who followed his deeds. He mentions seeing a blotting out of the sky, of the sun, and wilted husks of human flesh bask in the sorrow of the darkness. Says they can see and hear this change as humans are being removed of their human aspects and being replaced with digital robotic ones. Not just that, but towards the end of it, mentions that he sees a winged colossus descend from the sky, bestowing seeds of malevolence. It clutches the carcasses of our deceased, and spider-like droplets creep from its wrist, and I watch in mesmeric horror, as the title comes into play, as they crawl inside, causing the lifeless to writhe. So much like during the war, they still have this this issue, whereas their numbers dwindle, their opponents rise. That their corpses, their bodies, are now used in the army for the enemy. He says it's a grim revelation to see this happen and realize what's going on. It finishes off, says, at the point of no return, there are those who have perished only to rise diabolically as living heirs of catastrophe. A grim revelation takes root. We are being harvested. In death, we will carry out the deeds of a new, unhallowed dynasty. The idea that in opposition, alive, we are a hindrance, but in death, we can only serve, benefiting this new God, this new ruler, and the fear that that thought brings into it. As we progress into this, I'm seeing less and less social commentary. That doesn't mean that it's not there. After all, it took me a couple tracks after Maelstrom Prison to sort of see the commentary that might be in there. So it's possible I'm just missing the commentary on some of these other tracks, but I'm failing to see where it goes here, and it feels almost as if they decided to start with social commentary as a jumping off board, and moving away from it past that. Though that isn't to say, again, that the social commentary is completely removed here in the later aspects of this story. It could just be that I'm not seeing it anymore. There could still be parallels drawn, I think, between the modern day rise of digitization in our lives. Wait, we also checked out, it was Kraftwerk last week, and their song about, the whole album was about computers coming into the lives of mortals, of people, but they also had a couple songs about the dangers of that as well. I think it's interesting we've had these back to back here. So yeah, that's where we're at right now, moving into Carving Thine Kingdom. I don't quite know what's going on with this one. The perspective is dual. The very first stanza says, "The empire that lay before him was forged by deception." If maybe it's talking about a ruler of this area prior to the god coming in, and this god speaking about that past tense, but he says the land itself steeped in the blood of its indigenous. Such is the nature of war. Only a king and those that bow before, united by the shackles of tyranny, which is also what's going on here. The land itself is steeped in the blood of the untethered, the people who were indigenous to this land, the earthlings, if this is Earth we're talking about, and the god came in and shed that blood onto this ground. We're also talking about being united by the shackles of tyranny, which is 100% the brainwashing that was going on. But it could also be purposefully drawing a parallel between this rule and the previous one where humans ruled over humans. However, later in the track, we continue to see the ideas that my will is inescapable. I am everlasting. These are certainly told from the perspective of this god. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on here, but we do see a consistency of ideas talking about the everlasting element of this specific dynasty, this era of rule, and how it will go on forever. There is no escaping this one, which I'm sure is what rulers have said in the past too, though they didn't have immortality on their side. I think the idea still stands. I do think that the parallels are supposed to be drawn, but I'm not entirely sure based on the shifting perspective here. But there's not a lot of lyrics, and that is the general gist of it, is that things have quieted down. There is control and order everywhere. I've taken away free will, and this isn't going to change because I am eternal. There really aren't any lines here that I felt were phenomenal beyond the rest, but I do like the chorus in the way that the beginning opening lines of the chorus have this really nice flow to them. It says, "Sequestered in the night sky, the tapestry of stars, false czars with their progeny weave their sovereignty across the galaxy." It's a really nice way to utilize interline rhyming to shift the rhyme pattern across a couple before we land on the one that's going to finish out the idea. It has this shifting element that I think fits well here with the track about being changes, the new way things are. I think this track was also the one that had that 7/8 section, although I don't know if that was in the chorus, but pushing against an order, I think, is an interesting aspect of this track, and having this consistent moving idea rather than the elegance that we have seen prior might be leaning into that. But again, that might be something for a second listen. All right, let's wrap this up. Let's see what's going on with Heirs of the Descent. A lot of movement going on. We've got the bass. We have some sort of acoustic string. We have a synth over here. This is chaos. There's a mechanical groove underlying all of this that I feel is intentional. A rhythmic rigidity. So that whole section right there was 16th note picking on a single note, very much like black metal does, lacking any of the contrasting melodic stuff we have heard so far. This is definitely an overtaking of order. Full wide sounds. Very uplifting. What? Like a release. Interesting. Drums cutting out except for the cymbals to allow for a new chord progression coming out of our orchestral element. Those bends were perfectly placed. Of course, we gotta have some marching snare in this. The whole idea is that he's controlling the world. I was muted. I just remembered that the last track had a fade out, and it goes along with the final line spoken was cherish the fall of my enemies, for I am everlasting. The concept of eternity. That's where that comes into play. That was just an eerie ending, though, for this. Certainly, to me, implies a loss for the heroes. The villain certainly won at the end of this one. Um, none of my thoughts have changed. I'm certainly a bit fatigued, um, especially given the higher focus on rigidity in this one, which I think is supposed to speak about the possible total control that this god has, and that any rebellion has been squashed and everyone is under his mind control, and thus there is complete order. Merging the flesh with the machine, creating things that are no longer chaotic. And thus we have a song that focuses on more rigid rhythmic ideas. It focuses on, well, we had that snare idea at the end, the marching snare that led us into our outro. The song as a whole loses a lot of its melodic charms that I love from a completely, unthematic angle. Just what kind of music I like. The stuff that I praised from early on in the album, a lot of that was missing here. We did have a few guitar solos that I enjoyed, but they were kind of devoid of spark, of magic. The pacing was fine. They just kind of felt okay, and I don't know if that's me having, me ready for the album to be over and them doing what they do, right? As I said, they don't really change up their sound too much from track to track. They're doing what they do, and they do it well, and there's not a lot of variety within that. And it might be because I'm getting a little tired of that sound, or it could be that they purposefully aim to have something that felt a bit flatter to showcase the lack of passion and creativity due to the world being less chaotic. I don't know. But the song falls flat for me. It's not a really strong ending musically. I think it's a strong ending thematically when we hit the lyrics. We'll dive into a little bit more of that and see if there's anything in there that would explain the rigidity and lack of melodic flair. The elegance is gone, I guess. It's just brutality at this point. And, like I said, that doesn't really work for me musically. It's not the type of metal I like, but it works for the story they're telling. So there's a lot of things that go into me being a little less enthusiastic about this ending here. But, other than this one track, everything in this album is just well, this track is executed to a high level too. It just utilizes different compositions. Anyways, I love the guitar work. I love the bass work. I love the drumming. The vocals are fine. The higher vocal reminds me a lot of that nasally or black metal vocal that I'm not a huge fan of, and yet I kind of looked forward to it sometimes here. I think it works well somehow, as some way. I don't know if it's the type of music it's paired with. I don't know it's the contrast. I don't know if it is the contrast with the growls. I don't know if it's the harmonization of these higher harshes. Something about it kind of works, and I liked when it came in, especially coming in after and with that lower growlier harsh. And the composition, a lot of it just really works for me. I love the way that they write, their flow, their melody. Oh, the flow, even the rhythmic flow and the vocal stuff, and the lyricism is just gorgeous. Like, at this point, I'm just repeating a bunch of the the praise I've given them over the course of this album. It's like I said, my opinion hasn't changed. They do what they do exceptionally well. They don't deviate from it. I think if you're here for it, they got you. If you're not, there's not going to be anything on this album that changes your mind, or that one song that you like even though you're not a big fan of the album. Like, none of that's going to happen here. They do one thing, and you've got to be on board for it because they're not doing anything else. I appreciate the wider instrumentation in the sections they're used. Like I said, usually that's a bad thing for me, the way that it's used so shallowly. Shallow, that's not a word. It's a shallow implementation of the classical instruments as a way to take the sounds of them without any of the composition of them. But it works here. I like I said, usually that's a negative for me, but I enjoyed it. The rhythmic stuff, that's the meter, polymetric, all of it. It's just ridiculous. It sounds great. It is jaw dropping. There is high technicality and yet still a strong emotional element here. And the more I got into the lyrics, the more I want to know what's going on. It's a story that I find interesting. It feels very 90s to me. Does anybody get that? I feel like we don't have stories like this anymore, or at least maybe it's just the images that I get from this feel very 90s. I don't know. Like a mix of like 90s Western animation with stuff like heavy metal, but even like a little bit of 90s anime. Like I feel like they dealt with a lot of these topics of where does the mind and the machine mix, and where do they end with stuff like was it Serial Experiments Lane? Was that the one about the person who got the computer and had a completely different digital life in there? It's been a long time since I've seen that one, so I might be wrong on the title, but yeah, like a lot of 90s. This imagery gives me massive 90s vibes. So, speaking about that though, let's dive into this last bit of the story and see how it ends. And speaking of the 90s, The Matrix. Oh man. So, here in the end, the Earth finally named it. Very opening lines. In all its majesty, this wasteland once called Earth, from green to gray to black, extinguished by the hands of the Nephilim, the homestead of the accursed, a mere blink of an eye in this universe, will stand the tests of time within the confines of this virus disguised as a bloodline. So this all happened. It might have felt like a long time, decades, maybe even centuries of this fight, but as far as the universe is concerned, it's a fraction of a second. That's how quick we shifted from this being a human-led Earth to a technologically led Earth. The technology uses the souls to feed the machine. It speaks about a rise of mechanical elements. It doesn't seem like there's any hybrids anymore. Anything that is flesh and bone has been, what's the line? Enslaved to help power the machine, to give it strength and to allow it to exist forever. In much the same way in Matrix that humans are used as batteries for the machines enslaved. It mentions actually something. I don't think that was the only line that led me to a Matrix parallel. I think there was something else. Oh, the simulation weaves false realities, holding the mind captive within its fallacies. This blissful ignorance is a gift exchanged for unyielding compliance in his quest. These puppets earned their exploitation, their fate symbolic retribution. So yeah, he holds these bodies captive to use his power to gain strength and to continue on, and in turn gives them false realities to hold the mind captive. That is straight up the Matrix. Um, there are some robotic elements here. Might be all of them, might just be some of them, as we saw the progenies coming through in Maelstrom prison, although depending on how I read this, that's more of a manipulation thing. He crafted them through digital and flesh, but he was on the other side of a veil, so it's more of recruiting them through the digital, I think is how I want to read that. But I'm not entirely sure about the story at that point. I'm still not even sure that's the same person as the god that was in prison. So, regardless, though, the robots took over. We lost. And there are those who see themselves as being reborn in the image of a god. It says that they call him their father. And as the hive of insidious beauty, a swarm of cosmic death, we now ascend, a radiant bloom across the universe to conquer all life forms and feast upon the light, assumingly bringing darkness to other planets as well. This is a virus that's presumably started here, but may even have been before our time and will continue to consume worlds. That's that's this album, Vile Genesis, about a technology god who comes through, subjugates the masses through brainwashing of technology, uh, takes over the world, eliminates all resistance, and enslaves all humans that are left to be used as a source to power itself. Interesting. Well, I don't really think I have anything to add past that, so I enjoyed this. It's fairly rare that I get an album thrown at me that I enjoy on almost every facet. The lyrics here are awesome. The musicality is awesome. The music itself sounds good to me. It's my type of music, which I would never have guessed, honestly. But it ended up working for me, even if I was a bit fatigued by the end of it. Um, yeah, I'm just really enthusiastic about this one, which is, yeah, bit of a rarity, which is fine. I don't have to enjoy the music I listen to. Sometimes it improves the analysis. Doesn't always though. A lot of the single track reactions we do are fairly deep analysis, mostly positive, and rarely do I want to listen to more of it. It's usually a rare one. Like, yeah, I need more of that. Like immediately go listen to an album. Like I said, that's fine. It's sort of par for the course, and I don't mind it, honestly. I actually really like digging into music that I don't think I would ever listen to on my own. There's just something really fun there, and it allows me to fully engage the more analytical side. Because even on this, I went casual a lot, and I just kind of jammed with it. I'll be honest. Anyways, those are my thoughts on Inferi's Vile Genesis. Let me know what you thought. Give me your perspectives, opinions, if you enjoyed it or not. Put all that stuff down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link for Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server. There's a bunch of stuff in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of them. All right, that wraps it up for today. Tomorrow morning, I'll see you all for the live stream. Starts bright and early at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's not really bright and early for me, but West Coasters on the U.S., that's like 8 a.m. in the morning. 8 a.m. in the morning. Fantastic. Um, and I know some European folk, it's later in the day. Some are even eating dinner, which I find really interesting. I don't. The time is fascinating to me. They live in the future. You ever think about that? Like, it's a weird way to phrase it, but it's not wrong. Anyways, everyone's invited. Live streams, Sunday live streams are public now, but the song selection is pre-chosen from the patrons. All right, until next time, remember, be critical, not cynical. I don't know what I'm doing with my arms. And have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.